For those of you who've heard me speak before, and I should probably reintroduce myself, my name is Vinny. I am the Senior Parliamentary Advocacy Advisor for TB at Results, and I work in Sahira's team. So Sahira and I are a little double act, and we work on the TB portfolio. And those of you who've seen me speak before or have spoken to me before will all know that there is not a single opportunity to talk about Parliament that I will pass up. And so, obviously, on the agenda tonight, we had what I'm calling the art of writing parliamentary questions. So, whilst I'm not able to kind of deliver it in a sort of live format, I thought I would pre-record it. And the benefit of having it pre-recorded, I guess, is that you've even then got a separate little bit of this meeting which you can go back to whenever you need it. And I guess the second benefit is that it's still light outside. Well, actually, it still will be light outside when you're watching this live as well. Sorry, excuse me. So yeah, I'm here to talk about parliamentary questions, which I think are one of the most effective ways that we can really quickly and really in a really agile way get answers from the government on a whole range of questions. So I put together this little presentation, which I'm going to talk through, and as I say, the slides and all that, and this video will be available if you want to use it again. And there are a couple of links which I'll ask Naveed to share in the chat as well as we go along. So yes, the art of parliamentary questions. So what are parliamentary questions? Again, some of you who've seen me speak about this before for other results calls. So parliamentary questions are the mechanism by which parliamentarians ask questions of the government. And they come in two forms typically, written questions and oral questions. So oral questions are the ones that you would see on when you watch a Parliament TV, or Prime Minister's questions is the best example of oral questions, where they're orally asked in Parliament, if the name doesn't make that obvious. But written questions is the one that we're concerned about today, and written questions are a lot more kind of behind the scenes. There's loads of them flying back and forth all the time, and the only time they're only ever really brought to our attention when I don't know, maybe there's a bit of an unusual answer or a bit of an unusual question, or when someone like myself or other people at Results do some digging about what the government believe on certain things. So as I say, one of the benefits of PQs is that they're answered really quickly. Well, I'll touch on this a bit later as we go on, but typically you can expect a reply from a government minister within 7 days, which is a pretty quick turnaround, especially for those who've maybe written letters in the past and you've been waiting 6 months or a year for a response from the government. I mean, I've definitely been in that boat before. But yeah, so this is specifically written questions. So the way that written questions work is that members of Parliament will send these very specific kinds of questions to an office in Parliament called the Table Office. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's there to tables questions, it tables debates, but written questions will be sent to the Table Office. And then from there, if the question fulfills the criteria, which I'll discuss in a wee bit in a moment, providing it fulfills all the Table Office's criteria, they will then send them to the government department responsible for answering that question. We're in a team of civil servants. We'll do the research and we'll draw up an answer. And that the answers can range from very detailed to very snappy. It really depends on the kind of question that you ask or the kind of person that you're asking it to. So, if you have maybe you're writing to a particularly tetchy minister, not that any of them exist really in the Foreign Office, to be fair, but you see some recently where they just get maybe like a one sentence reply and it's meant to be like a bit of a put down, but it's not very amusing. All answers to written questions are signed off by a minister. That minister could be in the Commons or in the Lords, but they all will be signed off by a minister, because obviously if the minister's name is going on it, they want some ability to be able to say what it says. They're not just going to kind of sign things off willy-nilly. There is a kind of quite rigorous process of sign off that they go through, but because they're only short, the turnaround is quite quick, as I say. And then, of course, all the answers from the government are then on the record, so we can go back, we can sort of go back in time and use that as part of our advocacy to say, or well, not even necessarily part of that. A lot of the time, the fact-finding exercise is like, how much is the government doing? I mean, I'll explain this a bit more as I go on. I shan't get bogged down in the detail here. So I thought a good way to start would be with some example questions. And you may see that the example questions that I've pulled out here are all from the same member of Parliament. That's because I wrote these questions back in my time working in Parliament. I was working for Stephen Twigg when he was chair of the International Development Select Committee. So I've pulled these questions out because I wrote these questions once upon a time. I can't say I necessarily remember writing them all, but I wrote these once upon a time. So it's just to give a bit of a sense. I think even from just reading the kind of first couple of questions there, they're not like, it's not obviously how you would ask a typical question to your, I don't know, to your mate or to each other. They have this very specific structure that you have to follow. So it's so and I'll jump into a bit more, but the more observational among you will already start to see the pattern. So the key to a written question, but I guess the first stage of the written question, is to always begin the question with this: to ask thee. And then from there, you expand the question out. So it's to ask the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to ask the Secretary of State for Defence, to ask the Minister for Rural Affairs. If there's a minister that responds to that portfolio, then you address it specifically to that minister. You can, I mean, a good fail-safe is the with, I guess, if it's FCDO questions, you can always just write to the Foreign Secretary. If you have I don't know, a question about defence, instead of finding the specific defence minister, just write to the defence secretary, and then they'll make sure that, I say the table office will then make sure that the question is allocated to the correct minister to respond to. So providing that you begin your question by saying to ask thee, then you're off to a great start. If you don't have to ask thee, then the table office won't question it. This is just the typical British parliamentary convention that we just have to follow. And as I say, even though it's written at the bottom here, you can't just address your written question to any minister that you like. So as I say, you can't ask the defence secretary about potholes. But the table office would reject that question anyway. But as I'll explain in a moment. So I guess, well, the next bit then is getting past the table office. So to go back to the earlier question, what we've got then is we've got the kind of first section to ask the Secretary of State for Foreign Commonwealth Affairs, and then from there is what is the kind of body of the question. Once you've got the parliamentary formality out of the way in the first couple of words, then the meat of the question comes in. Then, so you see from this question, of how many experts the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative multidisciplinary team is comprised. Very specific question. Very, very specific question. So even though that was an example of a very specific question, you can ask questions about really whatever you want. If the British government is doing something in that area or is funding something in that area, then you're entitled to get a response from the government on it. But the key is getting it past the table office. So the table office is the gatekeeper for these questions. And if you can basically get the table office sign off on the first go, then you're saving the MP's offices loads of time. And I probably should have explained this earlier on, but I think the reason for kind of giving you this ability is that, giving you the framework to answer these parliamentary questions or to write these parliamentary questions just makes it that 1% easier for an MP to just copy and paste your question into the portal in Parliament that they need to and answer it. It's just saving them that extra little bit of time that makes the process just a little bit easier for them, so it's more likely that they'll do it, because you're taking all the way. All they have to do is literally copy and paste them, and most people in the 21st century can copy and paste. So how do you get past the table office? That's the first big, I guess that is the first and only big issue, really. So what are some of the things that I mean, just from my memory, these were some of the things that we would get ours pushed back on. So it's addressed to the wrong minister. As I say, asking the Defence Secretary about potholes, they will just reject that one. So make sure it's addressed to the correct minister and to the correct department, or you make it to the correct department, not necessarily the correct minister. The question is too specific, or the question is too broad, and you'll see I've expanded on this a bit below, because how can a question be too specific versus too broad? So I've just written these two examples off the top of my head. To ask the Chancellor of Exchequer why inflation has risen. That's such a broad question. The Chancellor isn't going to be able to, sort of respond to that in a single paragraph. So the table office will push back and say that, that's too broad a question, you need to be a bit more specific. But then equally, to ask the Chancellor of Exchequer how much money Liverpool Football Club received from the Exchequer for land drainage projects on municipal land between spring '84 and winter '94. Needlessly, probably that information doesn't exist. It's completely fictional, but it's too specific for them to be able to ever come up with an answer for. So you've sort of got to, you've got to have a fine balance between it being too specific and it being too broad. And I know that sounds very contradictory, but I'll skip to this bit first and I'll step back. But there is a great resource that you can use to work out to basically base your questions off. And that is the website in which all the questions and answers are published. So you can go back through any period. I'm not actually sure. I should probably mess around with how far in time you can go back, but I imagine you can go back based on Hansard. I mean, I only ever tend to go back to like 2015 or 2010. But all the questions and answers are published on the parliamentary website that I've got, and Naveed will post it in the chat for you. So it's a really good source of reference for other questions, or templates if you're looking for templates for other questions. You can use that as a good kind of introduction, even as a springboard. Oh, do you know what? I like the sort of look at that question. I'll copy and paste that. I'll just make a couple of changes to it so it's a bit more of the kind of thing that I want to ask. But it's a really, really good resource for being able to base your questions off. And as I said at the end, PS, it's a good way to check whether your MP has asked the question, because you can filter between questions. You can see questions that have been asked which haven't been answered. So it's a good way to kind of to keep your MP on the toes about it. And of course, then you can search for specific MPs, what questions they've asked, what answers they've received, or specific departments too. And I guess answers. So yeah, as I said earlier, the turnaround is pretty quick. It's normally about 7 days, and all the answers are published on the Parliamentary website.